Well, hello, and welcome or welcome back to Read Becca for my weekly chatty catch-up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading, and some general lifey chit-chat and catch-up from my week. This week was another good reading week. We have been solidly out of slumpy territory, I think, and so that's good. We're heading to the end of the year, I think, on a high. So I finished two things this week. Let's talk first about the audiobook that I finished, and that was The Teller of Small Fortunes by Leong. This is a brand new release, and I don't have it on hand, but look at this gorgeous cover that is on the screen. It absolutely is lovely, beautifully captures the vibe of this book, the bright, colorful elements. We've got our main character with her cart and a cat who is a prominent character. This is not cat baiting. It's just very warm, and it has a certain glow to it that this book also has. So we're following Tao, who is a teller of small fortunes, as you can tell. And she's sort of a traveling vendor in that way. She has this cart that she's traveling around with, going from town to town, telling small fortunes specifically. And she, it seems, has both a magical ability and she's also very good at deduction. So sometimes it's magical, sometimes it's just her intuiting things and predicting based on her intuition. But this magical ability allows her to connect and see things without entirely knowing the context. So sometimes she can sort of sway things, and other times she doesn't really know what she's saying. But usually she tries to use this power for good and for things that are beneficial to the locals where she is. However, it becomes clear very quickly that there are two main factors that kind of keep her moving. Number one is that she's an outsider. She's from a part of the world that is very outcast, where she's living and traveling around now. It seems like there's kind of an analog to China in this, though it is a secondary world that's been built out quite a bit. And beyond that, it seems people become suspicious of her magical abilities if she stays in one place too long. So she, as this traveling merchant, eventually begins making connections and winds up with sort of a traveling band together, having a sort of retired mercenary who's looking for his daughter, his buddy who is a reformed, maybe, thief, and also a baker who makes very ugly bakes, but tasty. And then, of course, the cat comes along as well. So we have this lovely traveling band story, and I enjoyed it very much. It is very cozy feeling. It has some stakes. Things do ramp up as we're going, but at least at the beginning, I would say this felt very, very repetitive. We're literally hearing over and over as she goes from one town to the next town. I'm a fortune teller, but only small fortunes. You know, it was kind of that vibe where we're hitting the same beats every time, and you get that with cozy, but this was a little bit much for me. So I enjoyed this a ton, but it doesn't seem very memorable. It also struck me as being very close to a mix between sword and sorcery and cozy fantasy, which I haven't seen before. So if you're not familiar with fantasy subgenres, sword and sorcery is kind of not really what it sounds like. It used to be the dead opposite of epic fantasy, which cozy fantasy kind of is now. But sword and sorcery was very episodic, heroic adventures. So no big scale or scope or stakes. These were very local, heroic stories about usually some sort of minor questing adventures with a band of adventurers. Well, here we do have that vibe of a band coming together. She collects these people who she kind of grudgingly gathers around her, and then eventually they all become friends. But there is that questing party vibe. There are very literal quests they go on eventually. So if you are interested or intrigued by something that has that feel of sword and sorcery with a cozy vibe, I think this is that book. I personally am just not really overly drawn to sword and sorcery. Not like I don't like it, but it's just not one of my favorite subgenres. So this didn't have that much appeal. I liked what this was trying to do with a lot of the world building, but I felt like with it remaining cozy, it kind of stayed overly light to explore some darker or heavier themes that it was slightly engaging with. So it was enjoyable, not super memorable. After that, I read Those Beyond the Wall by Micaiah. This is a companion novel following Space Between Worlds. And I would say this, while this is a companion novel as far as plot, you do really want to have read Space Between Worlds first because of elements to do with the multiverse setup there and technology involved in that first book, as well as some of the key players that are prominent here. Things from their background you kind of want to know. So here we are following a new main character. We're following Mr. Scales. And Mr. is a sign of respect, more or less, rather than a gendered term. So Mr. Scales is a woman. And the story that we get here is one of both Mr. Scales' background and some very scary things that are happening. Mr. Scales is a minion to the Emperor in the Wastes. The Wastes are this desertous, extremely brutal world, and they're ruled with an iron, very violent fist by the Emperor that Mr. Scales serves. But the Wastes are positioned outside of Wily City, this amazing, shining, clean city where everyone's needs are met. But they're a walled city, so hence the wall. The wall is there to keep the people from the Wastes out. And there is this extreme sense of class division. So something happens very early in the book that if you've read the first book, you'll kind of know what's going on. It's very, very obvious, but multiple people die at the same time. And so there's sort of this mystery element almost, trying to figure out what is going on and how. Although, as I said, like if you've read the first book, you at least have some inkling of where to think. And that intertwines both the Wastes and Wily City. But at the same time, the leaders of Wily City are ramping up the rhetoric against the people of the Wastes, making the people of the city more and more afraid, even though really they have nothing to do with this, the Wastes folks do. And so we have a really strong connection with things happening in the real world, and not in the book, in our real world, in terms of fear of the other, fear of outsiders, and violence tying into power dynamics definitely is strongly commented on this. Class and race as major prominent elements are really just beautifully tackled here in the story. I think this is a book that was very clearly written from a place of rage, and it works. So having just come off of N.K. Jemison's second Great Cities book, I feel like this was doing the same thing that Jemison wanted to do there and is really, really succeeding at it. So this has a compelling story in a developed secondary world, tackling real world problems and social commentaries through the speculative lens in a way that's not really beating the reader over the head, though it is clear and it is nuanced what it's talking about. So I thought that was handled very well. I also liked this one, I think, more than the first book, because the first book, we had a lot of melodrama. And here we have a lot of melodrama. We have a lot of action as well. But I think it works in a much more mature way. So I can see the maturing of the author here, as well as giving us kind of a more serious lens even in the choices that were made about what to engage with in the storytelling. So I think that played out in a way that worked for me much better than the first book. I also would say there's something weird about how this author writes, that it feels very frenetic. I don't want to say it's just pure action nonstop, because it's not, but there is a certain like contained energy to everything that's going on, and it feels strange. The only other author who writes like that I feel is very similar to this is Cameron Hurley. I think God's War would be a very good comparison to this series. So this is very unique, very, very different, tackling some amazing topics in a rage-filled way. The author's note also mentions some context for this, so I highly recommend picking up and reading that as well. But yeah, I think this was very, very successful follow-up. This also was on my list because it was up for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize this year, and it did not win, but it was definitely a worthy nominee, truly imaginative, truly thinking about our world and society. So big success. Then onward to what I'm reading currently. I am on audio listening to Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. I'm also reading the short story collection Salt Slow by Julia Armfield, and The Saint of Bright Doors by Vajra Chandrasekhara. So I think that's all that I have going on for this coming week in terms of books. As far as stuff I've been watching, I had a big finish this week. In fact, I finished, or caught up to, I should say, Bob's Burgers. This has been a project for, I think, 3 years now. I can't remember exactly when I started it, but back during lockdown, I had wanted to tackle some of those zeitgeist type shows that have really made their way into cultural consciousness. And this was one of them that I tackled and started all the way back then. And it's almost 300 episodes at this point and is currently running. So I didn't even realize, I think when I started it, there were 13 seasons or 12 seasons, and now we're on season 15. So, and it is active like currently. So I think I still have some more episodes yet to come in season 15, but I am up to current. So that was very exciting. I have enjoyed the show so much. I think it is such a heartwarming, delightful animated show about a family who don't really have much other than each other, and they love each other very much. They squabble with each other. The kids are constantly getting into trouble, and the family are just so great and supportive. But seeing their hijinks is always the fun part, right? And as well, they're trying to run this business and it's just never a success. So it's kind of a labor of love because Bob really, it's his dream to have this business. It's just a very lovely and heartwarming family show. I think that as it got on from the beginning of the series, they kind of went silly. They leaned into silly and really ramped up the musical numbers probably around season 5 or 6. And that was where it got good for me. It was like, they were like, okay, we don't have any constraints. We can just go all out. And so they just started throwing musical numbers in every episode. And it was musical before that, but they really ramped up there. And also I noticed the title sequence. Every time it's slightly different based on the shop next to them, but every single time they have banners on their shop that say grand reopening, grand re-reopening, grand re-reopening, whatever. I don't think they've ever actually closed and had a grand reopening. I don't think that has happened in the show. Yet this has been in the title sequence forever. I'm sure it's meant to imply that they're a struggling restaurant and that's trying to pull people in or whatever, but I don't think that's ever actually played out. So they've had this idea and not used it. It's interesting to me. Anyway, so that's Bob's Burgers. I also very randomly watched Carry On. I saw it on one of those dumb posts that was like, this is the best thriller on Netflix, whatever. Yeah. But it's got Jason Bateman. So I had to check it out. I got home ridiculously late and didn't want to start something. And so I started the movie thinking, oh yes, I'm just going to watch like 20 or 30 minutes and see if I want to watch it. And then I'll come back and watch the movie later if I do. And I watched the whole movie. It's like 2 hours long. So it was a very late movie watching, but it was enjoyable and it was an absolute thrill ride. And Jason Bateman was fantastic. I can't remember who the other main guy, right from the beginning, Jason Bateman is the bad guy, not the good guy. So the other guy is like a TSA agent and Jason Bateman is trying to get something on a plane that he shouldn't, clearly. So I thought Jason Bateman's performance way outshined anything else in the show. The good guy and his girlfriend were kind of mediocre. As like a very high action thriller movie, it was great, and obviously I stayed up watching it even when I shouldn't have been, so it kept me watching for sure. I also am in progress on a load of Christmassy things that I have not finished, so unfortunately I was hoping to have some finished to talk about before Christmas and recommend, but we haven't finished them, so we'll talk about them next week after Christmas. And speaking of, I think that's everything that I finished as far as watching stuff for this week. So lifey stuff, you can probably tell, I can't tell how bad the lighting is, but I dyed my hair. This is a slight disappointment in that it was supposed to be like extremely bright red and purple. And I had tried the same sort of color combination from boxed dyes quite some time ago now, several months ago, and it didn't turn out very similarly. because I don't want to bleach my hair. So I was hoping to try again with the professional style dyes that I used to use. And yet again, it didn't turn out. So the red sort of has turned this black cherry. The purple did not come through at all. So I basically had to re-dye the bottom half with the red as well. But I'm not mad at it. I mean, I do like this sort of black cherry color. It's just not what I was going for, like a very bright pop of red and purple. So that's all right. I definitely needed to dye my hair, I think, and this is a good little change. I also finally have moved along with getting stuff packed up and cleared away. So I just earlier today went and donated stuff, thank God. So the piles of things are out that I was complaining about last week. So I'm feeling much more, what's the opposite of, is combobulated the opposite of discombobulated? That I'm feeling much more combobulated now about my house and that things are calm. And it's much more restful now that things are organized and decluttered and everything. I also got denied for finishing up my Invisalign treatment. And that was a heartbreaking bummer, kind of. It's not really that bad. But I've been having orthodontics done for over 2 years now. And it's been a very long process. And I've been down to my refinements. This was supposed to be the only round that I needed of refinements, which is kind of the last steps. But I got in there and they were like, no, we've got 2 little spots that have a couple millimeters to move still, which is disappointing, but it's not aesthetic, it's actually really necessary. So they're needed. But that means I am on just retainers for the next couple weeks until my new sets come in next week of my Invisaligns. Not next week, next month. So hopefully though, that means we are in the home stretch for real. I've got a very short little round of final refinements, hopefully, and the couple millimeters movement will have happened. And then I will be done. But for now, I'm a little disappointed that I'm having to go through with attachments on my teeth, still waiting for my last round of aligners and dealing with that over the holidays. But it is definitely much less intrusive than having to continue on with treatment right now. So other than that, I think I've had holiday stuff all this weekend and holiday stuff next weekend to celebrate, and I'm counting on a very nice, quiet, calm week, very restful, focused on probably watching a lot of holiday stuff that I'm trying to target. And I also have at least 2 holiday romances that I really want to read, and I've just not been prioritizing over everything else. And I also need to get to probably finishing Saint of Bright Doors, because this is actually due back at the library and I have no more renewals. So I think those are probably the things that are going to happen this week. Definite, quiet, cozy, restful week for the holiday. So I think that's all for me today. I hope you are having a wonderful reading week. I hope you have a delightful holiday, regardless of which holiday you are celebrating. I hope you have the day off work. That is the number one. If you're not having to work, that is always a holiday. So that is all for me today, and thank you so very much for watching.